In December of 2015, I was making a north-south cross-country drive through the Midwestern United States. I was a university student at the time, a woman in my early 20s, driving home for the semester break. I was heading south through Kentucky on I-65 around 11:30 p.m., still about an hour away from the city where I planned to stop for the night. There were no other cars on the road at all, and I had not seen any for a while. That part of I-65 was a 6-lane divided highway, 3 lanes for each direction, in the area south of Mammoth Cave National Park and just northeast of Bowling Green, Kentucky. I was changing the music on my phone when I noticed an 18-wheeler coming up behind me in the rearview mirror. I stopped what I was doing, clicked off the phone, and waited for the truck to pass. The truck got right beside my car, and instead of completing the pass, it matched my speed and stayed alongside me. Then the driver turned on a spotlight on the side of the truck, which shone directly down into the cabin of my car and on my face. I was really confused, as I had never seen a truck do anything like this before. The driver kept the light on my car for what seemed like a very long minute, and I was getting creeped out. I kept my gaze straight ahead. I slowed my speed so that the truck would finish passing me. The driver turned off the light and completed the pass, moving from the middle lane to the right lane in front of my car. I was very creeped out by this, so I slowed down some more and changed to the leftmost lane to put some space between me and this big rig. As soon as I moved into the leftmost lane, the truck matched my speed again and moved over to the middle lane to come parallel to my car. The driver turned on the light again, shining it directly into the passenger side of my car cabin. I had now confirmed that this truck driver was definitely following me and being super creepy. I kept my gaze straight ahead because I felt like looking over would somehow make it worse. The truck turned off the spotlight and pulled in front of my car in the leftmost lane. I decided to move away again, changing lanes behind the truck back over to the rightmost lane and speeding up. I was probably going right around the speed limit again. By the time I completed my merge, I saw the truck beginning to shift lanes toward me again and speeding up to match me. Before they could pull up next to me again, I decided it was time to get out of there, and I floored it. I sped up to 90 miles per hour, the fastest I had ever driven in my life, and I put maybe a mile of distance between me and the truck before slowing down some. I looked up in the rearview mirror, and I will never forget the image. This big orange tractor trailer, illuminated by the street lamps of a highway interchange, was absolutely devouring the distance I had put between us. The truck was charging up behind me at an unbelievable speed. I sped up again, but it did not matter. The truck caught up to me, pulled beside me, and turned on the spotlight again. I stared straight ahead, keeping my speed, not daring to look over. It was at this time that I decided my only advantage was the maneuverability of my small car. I hit my brakes and dropped back behind the 18-wheeler, moving into the middle lane behind the truck. They moved over into the right lane, and I moved over behind them. I decided to stay right behind the truck in its blind spot so that they could not see me. I saw a sign for an exit and decided this was how I would escape. I waited behind the truck in its blind spot until we came up on the exit. I waited until the last possible moment. Once the truck body was beyond the point where the exit split away, I darted out from behind the truck into the exit. Thoroughly shaken, I wondered how far away from the interstate I should go, and if the truck would come looking for me. I ended up just pulling into a Wendy's right by the interstate. I parked and got out. I inspected my vehicle, looking to see if there was any damage, thinking maybe the driver was trying to warn me of something wrong with my car. There was nothing wrong with it. I waited at the Wendy's for a little while to make sure the truck was long gone before getting back on the interstate and continuing to my hotel. After the break, when I drove back to school, I did not use I-65. I was coming back from a friend's house. It was about 2 a.m. when I left, and I had a bit of a drive, mostly on the freeway. I was the only one on the freeway, zoning out and listening to George Norrie. I didn't notice another car had joined me until they were riding right on my tail. I thought it was odd that they wouldn't just pass me since we were the only cars in sight. The car moved to the left lane, and I was relieved they decided to go around me. Until they didn't. Instead of passing me, the car stayed at my same speed exactly parallel to me. I thought it was a little odd, but probably just an accident on their part. The car was nothing special, just an old black car with a solo male driver. I decided to give the guy some space and slowed down to about 60. From the left lane, he too slowed down until once again we were side by side. So I sped up to nearly 80 miles per hour. Within seconds, he gained speed and was right next to me. It became clear this was no mistake. The only thing on my mind was not being alone with this car. I sped up, trying to catch up with any other cars on the road. In the distance, I saw a tow truck, which became my target. As I raced to reach the truck, the car was parallel to me the entire time. I reached the truck just in time to see it signal and take the exit off the freeway. My mind was racing with every news story of drive-by shootings I had heard when I noticed a police car parked in the distance. The black car must have noticed it as well. He dropped way back behind me and got into the right lane. As soon as we both had passed the police car, the black car wasted no time in catching right back up. In hindsight, I should have pulled up behind the police car, but I had no idea what to say. I was being driven next to. I had to lose this guy. I slammed on the gas and was going about 95. He was doing 95 right next to me. I was so scared, and I was driving way too fast, and I didn't know what to do. I grabbed my phone and started to dial 911. He must have seen the light from my screen because immediately he dropped way behind me until I almost couldn't even see his lights. I sped up and took my exit, racing home. I'm a little nervous he saw where I got off, but I sped home, so I don't think he was following me. I don't think there is anything I can do about it, except think twice about driving late at night. I love to drive. Hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities, usually at night since there was less traffic. I've done it since I got my license 4 or 5 years ago, and I've never had any issues or run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've mentioned before, I often take these drives completely alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or to sort out personal issues. I also used these long, lonely drives to escape the toxicity of my household when I lived with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Now that I've moved out and am in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to just get in my car and drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a cluster of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else, and decided to take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and not be gone too long since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything happening in my personal life. So I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding, one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns slower in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was just admiring the vast, empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in the middle of nowhere, with the few houses miles back from the road lightless and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie. I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rear-view mirror, or someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then, I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I reached the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I was rounding another bend, I noticed a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile away. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and angled so that only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest jutted out onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked inside, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave and call it in the moment I got reception. If I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again I shouted, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, making their way towards my car, fast. The person did not have any blood on them or appear injured in any way, wearing a mask. Not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste and the music was still off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow, or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from what I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened and what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or he would drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay. But I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been to take a look, and that they would try to catch the guys who did it. Though with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though in my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police asked if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late-night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. I, female, 24 years old, was driving alone across the country to get to my son, who was with my ex. I had been out of state taking care of a sick family member. It was the middle of the night in New Mexico when I saw police lights behind me. I was exhausted and annoyed because I hadn't been speeding or anything. There were hardly any other cars on the road at the time, and I was close to the exit for the hotel where I had planned to stop for the night. I pulled over, and the cop came over to the driver's side window, which was weird, because usually they approach the passenger window on busy roads, and this was a highway. I gave him all my documents, and he just stared at me for the longest time. He walked back to his car and then returned almost immediately. He told me to step outside the car. I started feeling worried because I had received tickets before, but being asked to step outside the car seemed unusual. I did as he said, and he asked if I had been drinking. I replied that I hadn't, and then asked why he pulled me over. He claimed I was driving erratically, which was untrue. He then asked me if I was a terrorist, which was absurd considering I was a young American white woman just driving. There was no reason for such a question, especially since I was a veteran with an ID. He proceeded to conduct a walk-the-line drunk driving test, which I passed. Then he said he needed to search my car for drugs. I hesitated for a moment because I knew my rights, but it was late and I was tired. I didn't want to deal with the hassle of refusing, so I reluctantly gave him permission, knowing there was nothing illegal in my car. When he searched my truck, he opened a small suitcase that contained my stripper gear. He asked about it, and I told him I was a stripper. This seemed to anger him, and he started yelling at me, calling me names. This situation infuriated me, and I began assessing my options. I was mostly alone with this strange man, with occasional cars passing by, but the roads were mostly empty. It was the middle of the night. I had nothing on me to protect myself, and he was armed. He then told me to walk back into the tree line next to the road. I stared at him and firmly refused. I demanded that he call for backup and have other officers come to the scene. This seemed to catch him off guard. I insisted on a female officer and declared that I would no longer comply with anything he said. I began trying to flag down passing cars. He told me to calm down, wrote me a speeding ticket, and let me go. I never paid the ticket and never heard anything about it again. This incident was 20 years ago. At the time, I was shaken and eventually forgot about it. But looking back, I doubt he was a real cop.